Everybody happy with those? Thank you. I should have just drawn your attention to the fire regulations, which are behind me on the screen, and if you could also all ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent. I think everybody else knows about everything else. So we move on to the main items of business. We've done the minutes. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies for absence from Councillors Brian Ellis, Patricia Ellis and Val Henry. As a result, we therefore need the committee to nominate a member to act as Vice Chairman at this meeting, and I believe that you have a nominee, Councillor Ellis.
Yes, thank you, Gary. I would like to nominate Councillor Byam to act as Vice Chairman for the meeting. Committee, may I have your agreement? Thank you, that's agreed. Councillor Byam, could you join me here on the dais, please? Thank you. So moving on, declarations of interest. Gary, have members declared any interest before the meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. We've just received one declaration of pecuniary interest from yourself, Councillor David Ellis, in relation to planning item B3, as he is the agent for this application. As a result, Councillor Ellis will leave the chamber prior to discussion of this item, and Councillor Byam will take over in the chair.
Thank you. Item 4. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman, and my apologies for not submitting this earlier. Can I please declare a non-pecuniary interest in item 7.3? I sit on the Cranley Parish Council Planning Committee, and this item came before us some time ago. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions from members of the public? Have there been any questions, Gary?
None received, Chairman.
Very good. Any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since the last meeting? Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've just got one update for members, and it relates to the draft local plan. Members will be aware that on the 19th of July, full council agreed to the publication of the local plan, part 1. The 6-week publication of the local plan is now agreed to start on the 19th of August, which hopefully members will also be aware. Once published, officers will begin to make specific reference to relevant policies within the draft plan and will provide advice to members on the weight that can be given to relevant policies within the plan within the determination of any applications before them. The planning practice guidance provides advice in this regard, and at this stage draft policies will only attract limited weight. However, as the plan progresses, the weight to be given to policies will increase following each stage, and officers will advise members of the current position as we move forward. It's not considered that any of the applications before committee tonight would conflict with the draft plan, and therefore it is advised that each application must be considered in accordance with the 2002 local plan policies, the MPPF, and any of our relevant adopted guidance. So hopefully that is of assistance, but happy to take any questions on that. Thank you, members.
Members, do you have any questions for Peter on that? No, jolly good. Okay, moving on. Quarterly planning enforcement report. Beth, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. There was a slight error with one of the headings in the main agenda, so you'll have an update with the revised report and the revised heading. So if I take you on the update sheet to page 3, that's the single Eastern Area site-specific update. As usual, I just want to confirm that we are working very closely with the ward member and the parish council in moving this case forward. Then if I then take you to page 5, at the bottom you've got table 1. You'll note that it was an exceptionally busy quarter with over double cases received from the previous quarter. Similarly, we shut over double, so the cases on hand hasn't suffered too greatly, and actually at the end of business today it was 152 cases on hand. And if I take you to table 3 over leaf, you'll note that our performance against the performance indicator continues to be high. And then finally, on page 8, under the appeals lodged section, you'll note that there is an appeal for CCM in Ewhurst. Just an update to that. That is proceeding by way of inquiry, which will be taking place on February the 28th next year. That's all, Chairman. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Beth. Members, any comments? Councillor Dinas.
Thank you. I just really wanted to go back to the one on the eastern area that Beth mentioned, and really just to thank Beth and Victoria for a really professional, determined, and I think a very patient approach. It's a very complex issue, and I've been kept fully updated, and I know how hard they're working to resolve this. I just wanted to formally thank them for their efforts so far. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just ask officers if they have any comment on why the caseload was up or why there were so many cases in the last quarter? Is there anything that stood out, or is it just an abnormal spike? Thank you.
Another committee asked me that. The answer really is I don't know. The answer I gave to them was the weather's better, more building. And people tend to cut vegetation back so things become more visible. That's the only thing I can think of. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I was on the same statistics going to congratulate the officers for the achievement, because to have over double the previous quarter and the quarter before, and considerably higher than the 2 quarters before that as well, with the staff that they've got, to have, at the end result, to have actually reduced the number of cases that were in hand was highly commendable, and I thought the team should be congratulated on that achievement.
Hear, hear. Anybody else? No, jolly good. So move on to applications for planning permission, and just to note that in the event of site inspections being necessary as a result of any of the applications at this meeting, these will be held on Monday the 5th of September at a time to be agreed. So the first application to consider is item B1 WA 2016 0634 Dunsfold Airport Limited, Stovells Hill, Dunsfold. Miles, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please? Miles isn't here.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes,
Peter,
I'm going
okay.
to
Peter, would you mind,
that's okay.
Put on your Miles disguise.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Yes, so this application is made under Section 73 Town and Country Planning Act to vary conditions 1, 2 and 10 of the previously approved planning application WA 2016 0695, which permitted the erection of 6 new industrial buildings at Dunsfold Park, amounting to 9,966 square metres of mixed B-class employment uses. So I'll just take you through the location of the site. The area sits to the north of the wider Dunsfold Park airfield, outlined in red here. To the south, east and west, where the mouse cursor is, that is the existing business park. It sits on, or it's the approved buildings are located on sort of hard-standing parking area to the north of the site. There's a strong boundary along this, along the northern boundary, which is fenced, and there's mature trees beyond, which, as you can see, the blue line indicates the applicant's ownership. So this is the approved layout. This is slightly different to the approved layout that you would have seen when the application was brought to committee, the members that were on the committee at the time. There's been some slight minor amendments under a non-material amendment application, and that's made some revisions to elevations, positioning of windows, openings, and it added a few more car parking spaces. So in essence, it appears very like what has been approved, but there is some small changes there. So in terms of what the application seeks, is seeks to vary a number of conditions. Condition 1, this relates to the approved plan numbers. This is required to be amended to reflect amended plans should other matters be considered acceptable tonight. In terms of condition 2 of the approval, this restricts the overall floor space to that approved under the 2015-0695 application. The applicants are seeking to increase the floor space serving Building 2 from 2,273 square metres up to 3,624 square metres, increase of just over 900, through the provision of an extended mezzanine floor. And on screen now is the elevations of Building 2. As I mentioned earlier, there was a non-material amendment which allowed some changes to the elevation of the building, and previously it was the same all the way through with the sort of roller shutter type doors and small openings. They've added some glazing into this end of the building to accommodate a B1 type use and a specific end user. So if I scroll to the next image, this shows the floor plans. The ground floor plans are as approved, but as I say, they're introducing an additional mezzanine which is in this central section. So before they only have a mezzanine to the western end, they're now proposing some through here as well, to meet the needs of a specific end user. As a result, there's not considered to be any increased vehicle movements being highlighted, and the agreed vehicle movement cap, which was discussed previously, would not be altered. The County Highway Authority are also satisfied that this would not impact on highway safety, subject to the existing cap or on the capacity of the highway network. We've sought reassurance following a question from one of the members about the County Highway's position. Whilst I haven't got an updated formal response, they have verbally confirmed to us officers they're satisfied with this scheme in terms of its impact on highway safety. So hopefully that is useful to cover that question. In terms of condition 10, this condition currently restricts the use of all buildings to the flexible B1, B2 and B8 use. The applicants have sought a personal change of use for Building 1, which I'll scroll to now, which is this building, to be used by the Jigsaw School, who currently occupy some of the modular type buildings within Dunsfold Park. A personal permission to Jigsaw School is sought, as has been applied when approving the use of the other buildings on site specifically to that user. Given that the Jigsaw Trust or Jigsaw School currently occupy the site and they would relocate to this unit, the proposed change of use is considered to be acceptable. As such, condition 10 is amended as set out within the report update sheet to restrict building 2 to 6 to B1, B2 and B8 use only. And we've added an additional condition over and above those provided on the previous approval, condition 16, which ensures that the D1 use of Building 1 is personal to Jigsaw School only, and that if they cease to occupy it, that the building reverts to the flexible B uses at that appropriate time. So as I say, that's the elevations of Building 1. There's no changes to that. And this is the floor plans, and again that's agreed, and there's no changes to the actual layout of that Building 1. It's purely in relation to the use. So I'll move now to sort of determining issues. It's for members to consider whether or not the proposed changes as outlined would be acceptable in their own right. Officers consider that changes are acceptable and they would not be any wider impact on the highway network, residential amenity, and officers remain of the opinion that, as with the previously approved application, the resulting economic benefits of the scheme, which makes use of the brownfield site, which is considered part of the brownfield site of Dunsfold, significantly outweighs the limited sustainability credentials of the scheme. I'll just refer you to the report update sheet now. We have slightly amended conditions. There was one slight error and we've just clarified. So condition 2, wording is amended to make reference to gross floor area. The submitted plans refer to the gross floor area, and previously we'd drafted it as gross internal floor area, which didn't take account of surrounding walls and such like. So that's been amended to reflect that. Conditions 10 and 16 are also corrected to refer to Building 1, as I referred to a moment ago, which will be occupied by Jigsaw School, and not Building 2 as published in the agenda, so apologies for that. So subject to those revised conditions, There's a revised recommendation on your update sheet, and that is subject to the section 106, which was applied to the previous application and still bites on this application. There's a relevant caveat in it, so this contribution can still be secured towards the delivery of the footway between Allfold Village and Compass Bridge. Conditions 1, 3 to 9, and 11 to 15, plus the informatives 1 to 7 as set out in the agenda, and revised conditions 2, 10 and 16 as set out in the update sheet. It's recommended that permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Right, open it up to members. Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Chair. And as the ward member, it's probably right I'll go first this evening. And I am looking at this by not visiting the whole application, because I know that was very clear in the report. But I'm a little bit concerned that this has come only 15 weeks after our discussion for the original application. It seems a very short period of time for an application being approved and then almost immediately going for a variation. But I'll leave that point as where it is. I mean, at that meeting, we did have a very lively debate about the traffic impact. And I know people were concerned about the vehicle movements. I was interested, Peter said there'd be no additional vehicle movement. Well, I cannot see that in any way, shape or form. With the change with Jigsaw and the other floor space, you're going to get no additional vehicle movements. So I don't actually accept that at all. I think I need to make it very clear that we're very supportive of the Jigsaw School, who do fantastic work in the community. So my comments aren't based about them at all, because I think we're all very supportive. One of the issues that did come up, and maybe Peter will be able to answer that, is it talks about car parking spaces. And having had the portfolio for car parking, I do know about disabled provision, and I believe the national guidelines are 6% as a minimum. And I actually haven't seen anywhere within this report what provisions are going to be given for disabled parking. So if it's not already included, I would like a condition to say it will meet those standards, so we have the 6%, but I'd also like Dunsfold to consider that I don't think there's even any disabled parking at their main office. So I think we have a responsibility to have a condition there to make sure that does happen. One of my comments would be that in the previous application, we did talk about inadequate transport infrastructure, and that is mentioned several times in this report. And although we're only having a slight increase, it can only sort of compound the problem. It's not going to mitigate the problem. We've got an infrastructure that's inadequate, so it's going to be even more inadequate the more people we put in. So again, I'll just make that comment. On page 32, and there may be a very good reason for this, it talks about representations, and it maybe it's just I've never seen this before. It said 6 letters have been received objecting to the proposal, and then it says 3 from which the same address. And I just wondered why we highlighted that 3 people who are individuals who have the right to support or object have been clumped together saying, well, 3 of them are from one house. Well, I see lots of applications where multiple people in the same houses either support or object, and I've never seen that split. And that concerned me a little bit, and I'm sure there's an explanation for that. I do have a number of other points, but I do feel that I'm sure my colleagues have very valid points either to support or to object. So maybe at this stage just to take a back seat, see what my colleagues say, and if I need to come back, maybe with your indulgence. Thank you.
Certainly, thank you. Peter, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think the point on change in vehicle movements, I think I probably wasn't particularly clear. There will be an increase in floor space, likely impact on movements. What is the case, though, is the cap that has been agreed will not change. So we're allowing the additional floor space, but we're not allowing an additional increase in proportionate numbers of vehicles that can enter and exit the site in any one day. So that's the important point. And that's the figure that has been agreed. And as you say, there was a long debate about that at the previous meeting. In terms of the disabled provision, the design and layout has obviously been put forward with the end user in mind, specifically on building 1, that is Jigsaw. Very happy to support an additional condition requiring a bit more detail about the disabled parking if members feel that to be necessary. But as I say, Jigsaw Trust have been involved in specifying what they need. They haven't come forward with an additional need for that disabled parking. But yeah, as I say, more than happy to support a detailed provision and set out, understand a bit more the requirements of the Jigsaw Trust. In terms of the parking at the site office, that sits outside the red line of this application, and it's not something we can control, I'm afraid. I think the other point was in regard to the letters of objection. And the way this is expressed, we often express it in this way because the trigger for public speaking is 5 letters of objection from individuals or individual households. We've obviously had 6 letters, but 3 has come from one household. Whilst someone could write 10 letters, 15 letters, and all come from one household, we treat that as one representation. So it doesn't demean what they've said, but we've received 3 different letters from one household. We treat that as one overall representation and report it as such to members. And that is the way we will often report it. So apologies for any confusion there. I think that picks up on all the points on the questions for now. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Denis, would you like to come back?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that explanation about the 5 letters. So I've learned something, so I'm very grateful for that. Just quickly going back to the disabled, I think in the report it talks about 282 parking spaces. So as it is part of this application, I would expect the 6% to be of the 282 to be for disabled. I accept there be other parking spaces not subject to this application, but for this one, if we're going to have consistency, it should be 6% of the 282. Thank you, Chair.
Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I note that. The only point I would raise is that's not specifically in Waverley's adopted standard, that 6% rule. Sorry, where did you say that came from? Because that's not a point that officers are aware of as far as I'm concerned.
From my time in car parking, it's national guidelines that 6% was the minimum recommended for car parks when, you should have that. So it's sort of like a national best practice guideline.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, sorry, thanks for that clarification.
So, Councillor Denis, would you like to propose an additional condition to be attached to this approval?
I would, yes. That for the 282 spaces at 6% are provided for disabled users. So I would. Thank you.
Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Gray. All those in favour of that? Thank you.
Okay, so... Yeah, sorry, could everybody put their hands up who's in agreement? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Thank you.
Sorry, against? Abstaining?
1.
Okay. Thank you. So that additional condition will be attached to the motion later on. I did have one question before I move on. It's about the playground. The existing Jigsaw has a playground with various equipment, but there doesn't seem to be any scope for that here, and I know that Peter was going to look into that.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I should have picked that up in the introduction. It will be maintained in the existing location adjacent to the modular building, so it's not directly outside their buildings, but they are maintaining a play space on site for those those going to the school. So hopefully that's useful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to reinforce that the issue on disabled bays, because generally on the site there's no evidence of any form of facilities for disabled parking. And I would have thought that with Jigsaw, I know that they haven't specifically requested it, but I know that Jigsaw has a number of people who obviously have pupils who would potentially qualify for disabled parking. Moving on, the 2 things that concern me about this is condition 11, where it talks about the restriction on HGV movements. And I know this has been here before, but there's no requirement to monitor that, to report on that, or to give any evidence of it. And this has been raised before, and I would have thought it would have been an appropriate opportunity to put in there something about reporting. If I can also raise in conjunction with that condition 15, which talks about the total restriction, and I'm comforted by the officer's comment that this is a total number including whatever comes out of this application, so that the total number won't be increased. But it does refer to a report on a 6-monthly basis, and I feel that this requirement, which I think goes back to 2007, and it's a requirement to report on HGVs and non-HGV vehicles, which has never actually been reported on, should be more often than 6 months. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask this, considering that it's an automated system, to ask that on a monthly basis, and that those reports are submitted every 2 weeks. So if I could have the officer's comments or response to that before I make a proposal for amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Gray. I think the 2 comments I'll make on the condition 15 first, on the monthly basis or every 2-week basis. I think we've got to take account of is we've very recently considered this application for that same amount of numbers, or the same amount of numbers of traffic movements. Historically, we have received the data. We haven't received the breakdown of HGV and car movements. That's what we haven't received. And from memory, from reviewing all those figures, I think there was only one time where they actually exceeded the level of movements allowed, or the cap, outside of this events such as Wings and Wheels and things like that for temporary uses. So I think it would be very much an onerous condition to put it on for less than 6 months, particularly given what the detail we've received to date and the monitoring that we've got going. In terms of monitoring, so obviously this condition was applied to the application you've recently approved. We've now received some full detail about how they're going to monitor and differentiate between HGVs and cars. We haven't discharged the condition formally yet, but from my point of view, I actually reviewed that detail today that's come in, and we're satisfied that they can now bring that forward. So my view is, or my recommendation is that the 6 month is appropriate. There's no significant change between this application and the previous application. Obviously, there's a change to the jigsaw school, which is less likely to generate the HGVs, which are a concern. So I'll leave it to members to consider those points, I think. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Gray, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you. I think we've got to emphasise that this obligation goes back to 2007, and the 2007 obligation has never been honoured. That's the split between the HGVs and the others. I think the other thing you refer to is the no significant change. Well, there is a significant change, and that was the increase in the volume that was agreed, the volume of traffic movements, as part of the original application for which these amendments are being put forward. And I think it's quite reasonable as a council for us to want to see the movements and potentially any movements towards the peaks on a much more regular basis than 6 monthly. 6 months, when would they submit that report? That could be 3 months in arrears. The data could be 9 months old. And I think it's not an unreasonable request, especially in view of the fact that, as you've said yourself, they've reviewed the methods by which they are basically collecting this data, and it's automated. So I don't believe it's an unreasonable request to ask them to submit this monthly.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just weigh in on this conversation, I think 6 months is reasonable from the point of view that a breach of condition, you've got a 10-year period to enforce. So asking for monthly information, one, we've got to consider the officers that need to look at the information when it comes in, and two, the cost to the applicant. So I think 6 months in this circumstance is quite reasonable, given the timescale that we have to take enforcement action if there is a breach. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Gray, would you like to make a proposal? And then I'll come to Councillor Goodridge.
I'd like to come back on that. When you talk about the cost is marginal. And all the data is there. And as far as the cost to officers in reviewing it, well, it'd be very simple. Just get them to put it onto their website directly in terms of the information. And I don't see that is a particular inhibitor. And I understand where you're coming from in explaining the position normally. And the reason for going to this is that we have not been happy with some of the reporting that's come about for this. We are still waiting for an implementation date for the HGV, and I think that to give people awareness of this information on a much quicker basis would be a lot more reassuring.
Right. And any further comments from the officers? Does anybody else have a comment to make on this same subject before? Oh, everybody does. Okay. Well, Councillor Goodridge was first, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. When we decided the original application, it was December 15, I think, is when we decided it, and we put on condition, the equivalent to condition 15 then. It seems to me totally unreasonable when people are coming to make a variation to then go through the other conditions and have another go at them subsequently. If we wanted to do that, we should have thought of that 6 months ago and not try and pick it up now. And it seems to me that if I was the applicant, I would be unhappy about it. I mean, our legal officer's given a very valid point that even if we do get the information 6 monthly and late, we have plenty of time to sort it out, and I'm not happy, and I'm afraid I wouldn't support any amendment that change condition 15, because I think it's unreasonable for us to do so at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Woroszewski.
Thank you, Chairman. With the application as it is before us, I see absolutely nothing wrong with it in any way, shape or form. I do actually think it's unreasonable, and I agree exactly with what my fellow councillor has just said there. We've had plenty of opportunity to look at figures. I think what's being proposed by officers is perfectly reasonable, and any measures by us to look at that in any more detail is unreasonable. I know Dunsfold, I believe they still have a liaison group, and I've always been aware that they are happy to produce information. I don't think it needs to be in a condition, but I'm sure there's nothing stopping anybody from actually asking them for that information through whatever necessary forms, and I'm sure they'll be forthcoming in giving that information because they've got nothing to hide, and at the end of the day the figures are there for anybody to see, so I think there's ways around it without capping them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to put my weight behind Councillor Gray on this particular instance. The one parish council that made any measure of objection to this particular proposal, which, you know, in general supporting the school, totally supportive of that, but Hascombe Parish Council, which falls within my ward, did put in quite a significant number of objections, and the vast majority of that was behind the traffic issues and particularly around HGVs. So, you know, Councillor Gray's suggestion that we ask that that breakout between HGVs and regular vehicles, which it has been, you know, is how long we talk about 9 years overdue. It would be an appropriate thing to put in, because if it's 9 years overdue, clearly some muscle needs to be brought to bear to make sure we get the information required. So I'm supportive of Councillor Gray's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I don't quite agree with that. I mean, I think that there's obviously some concern about the monitoring and the effectiveness of it, and that was discussed at length at the original application was being considered in December last year. So I think we do want assurance that it's actually working, this monitoring system. And I don't know. I mean, I think we need to see. Maybe this is an enforcement issue, not so much an issue from this planning application. I mean, I think it is unreasonable to start changing something which we've already agreed. But having said that, I do think we need to understand that the current system is working properly and is working effectively. So I think that if there's going to be any addition to this condition, I think it has to relate to the officers being satisfied that the system in place is actually working effectively and is giving realistic numbers. Now, if there's any suggestion it's not, then all bets are off, I think, because I think, you know, this is a very crucial issue, this monitoring. But to change the thing without evidence or officer support that the system is or is not working, I think it would be doubtful. But I do think there's an issue here for officers to be satisfied, to confirm that they're satisfied, that the actual monitoring system in place is actually effective and is actually working and giving reliable figures. If that wasn't the case, then I would incline to support what Councillor Gray is proposing. But I think I'd like that officer assurance first, or lack of it first.
Thank you. Councillor Byam.
Thank you. Well, I must admit, I cannot remember, perhaps my memory is going bad, that we ever had a requirement until fairly recently for monitoring differentiation between HGVs or other vehicles and other traffic. So I don't remember that difference. So we've never ever asked for it, I don't think. At least I've never been aware of it, and perhaps I'm wrong in that statement. But the other question I have with regard to this is the fact that this particular application, which was approved, is the first and only permanent permission for business use of these buildings on the site, or everything else on the site is temporary use until 2018. I understand, but again, officers will be able to advise us, I'm sure, that the local plan will, of course, create a different set of rules for Dunsfold, amongst many other things, and therefore perhaps this monitoring and vehicle change, etc., will have to go by the board anyway, because it's not relevant to whatever is decided with the local plan. So I don't agree with the idea of extending and creating a new set of rules or an increasing set of rules. I'm happy with what we hope that we're going to get, and I quite agree that we haven't had the information with regard to HGVs and other vehicles, the differentiation, and I look forward to seeing those. The other question I have with this one, which is going off the track slightly, is if Jigsaw School itself is moving there, and this is not the older children, this is, and young adults moving in there, it's the normal children as far as I can understand, then we then have a building which it will become redundant, which according to the build process, of course, they will be occupied by somebody else or be part of whatever is agreed as a full plan, and therefore there is the opportunity for increase in traffic movements because of that. So I look forward to hearing what the officers have to say from all the other questions that have come forward.
Thank you. Would the officers like to comment on those various comments?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'll work through. In terms of firstly, to Councillor Band's point, if that's okay, instead of the current system and comments previously raised, we hadn't been receiving the data to differentiate between HGVs and cars. This is something the enforcement team have been working on to get, and it's something that has come to the fore more recently, so we're pursuing it quite hard with the applicants. As I made reference to earlier, they have actually now submitted a sort of statement setting out the way they will monitor and differentiate between HGVs and cars. And as I say, I've read it today, and I'm satisfied it explains how they would do that. And currently they've got temporary sort of rubber tubing on the site, which you'll see across the road when, you know, for instance, when you're doing traffic monitoring or survey data on the highway. They've got them across both access points, and that can differentiate between HGVs and cars and the amount of movement. So that is on site now. That is a temporary arrangement to deal with the matters raised by the ward members and local councillors. What they are moving towards, which takes some time to do, and they obviously won't do it until we've agreed this complete strategy, is actually build something which sits within the road, and it can monitor weight of vehicles and differentiate between those. And that's the sort of second stage, which obviously there's a cost to it, and they're not going to implement it until such time as the council sign it off. But we're in a position where I feel we can agree that level of detail, and that's submitted in relation to the discharge of condition for the approved scheme. And as I say, that can go out this week from my point of view, and that has been agreed by the County Highway Authority, who obviously are better advised to advise how we differentiate between that. So yes, it hadn't been monitored up to today, but we're now satisfied that they're taking it forward and addressing the concerns specifically of the ward members, which very helpfully, they've supported that, and through the liaison group that's been mentioned, it's worked. It's taken longer than we'd want it to, but I think we're getting to the point now we can get that appropriate information. This next point, there was a point about the sort of local plan, and there's obviously a planning application as well. So the planning application is a hybrid application, and part of that is a detailed, requesting a detailed permission for the permanent change of use of the existing commercial building. So as you're aware, there's a temporary permission on the other business uses. That application seeks to regularise that, but permanently. But obviously that's an undetermined application. In terms of the local plan, that again looks to expand and maintain the business park, so it sort of complies on that point of view. And I think there was one other further point about the Jigsaw School moving and a building becoming redundant. The buildings they're in are porter cabins, modular type buildings. They're not long-term structures, but they're also subject to the personal condition that refers back to the business use. As would be the case if this was vacated, and the type of movements associated with Jigsaw is similar to a business type use, and subject to the cap being there, we still feel there's sufficient control on that. So hopefully that's useful. Sorry, it was a long answer, but thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Stuart Stennett.
Thank you, Chairman. A movement, just to be aware for my colleagues, a movement on an HGV is in and out. So you would probably class that as two movements, but it's one. And the other thing is that they're only controlled by VOSA normally on operator's licence. So those movements would be for the companies that have their operating centre on Dunsfold itself. Normal run-of-the-mill allows HGVs to come and go from deliveries, say if someone's delivering something from Leeds to a site, that's not classed as a movement. It's just classed as a delivery. You could put legislation in place which would be quite difficult, I think, to enforce. The other point I wanted to make is that the licences have changed since 2006. A 4.5 tonne vehicle now is classed as a large goods vehicle, which to me is madness, but that's the way it is. So you would have to go on size, and it would be quite difficult to do now. I think from a legal point of view, our good lady here has made some good points, and I think it would be difficult to monitor. Thank you.
Thank you for your expert advice. Councillor Denis.
Just really following on from what Mr. Cleveland just said, so we're 9 years down the road. Today we get a report on how they're going to do it, so it's an untested measure. So 9 years down the road we got a proposal that has not been tested. Thank you.
Councillor Woroszewski.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just an overall observation, really. I mean, this is the biggest employment site in Waverley, and we should be encouraging employment and encouraging people to have jobs locally. And with that, we can't have it all. I think Councillor Stennett would agree with me that most of the things we purchase, look at, buy, it comes via a truck. So we can't have it all. And I think we have to be very reasonable here that, you are looking at the biggest employment site in Waverley. We have got a cap on it, which some could deem to be unreasonable. Do we cap Sainsbury's? Do we cap other employment sites in the borough. No, we don't. So what's so different about this one? So I think we've just got to be careful that we're not overstepping the mark and putting too many restrictions on an establishment that I believe is doing its best to create employment. And I think Councillor Byam is entirely right that temporary conditions will expire in 2018, which will change the face completely. So you might find that there's plenty of vehicle movements there because the 2018, the conditions will change, so therefore they won't apply, but these will. So I think we have to have room for compromise here. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gray, did you wish to make a proposal?
I'll come back. I think that in view of the comments I've heard, I've made my point. I believe that the issue is one of being advised in an appropriate time period. I do take on board Councillor Borozeski's comments about the employer. I also take on board their cooperation. I mean, they have been cooperative in the liaison meeting. But as we've found that the original requirement to split large vehicles, HGVs and cars, does go back a long way. For whatever reason, that was not followed up. It's only basically come about more recently, and they do seem to be complying. And on that basis, I would withdraw my comments as far as the 6 monthly basis, and will encourage Dunsfold Park in a spirit of cooperation to submit them on a monthly basis to us voluntarily. I'm quite happy to do that and propose it to them. I'd like to refer back to my comment on condition 11. There's no monitoring on that. That probably gives us much concern on the overnight side. The officers didn't come back on that point, and before I consider whether I would like to make a proposal, perhaps they would do.
Peter, did you wish to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Gray. It's a good point on condition 11. Sorry I didn't pick up on that one when I came back. But we've got condition 15, which would agree a strategy to differentiate between the two, and that is something that we could monitor if there was concern that it was exceeding the average 10 movements per night. So in combination, we can ultimately differentiate between the split of HGV movements on the site, and it could easily be monitored and passed on to the council. The council could monitor it if it's such a significant issue we need to go out to. There's only one further comment I would make with regards to this, and ultimately this is a Section 73 application, and this is a standalone application, but obviously all the conditions were applied to the 2015 permission. If we were to put the restriction on that and add a restriction, they could just implement the other permission and go in line with the conditions they've already got. So we've got to be wary of what conditions we add. If we make them too onerous, we just risk, as comments been made, risk them just reverting back to that. And there's, from my point of view, I can't see the justification in changing that condition. But that is definitely something we can monitor if it is a concern, and that hasn't been raised to us recently, as far as I'm aware. I'm looking at enforcement colleagues as a point of reference, and they're saying no. So hopefully that's useful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Stewart-Stennett, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, we're in danger, I think, of becoming confused here. I think the 10 movements a night, if I may be wrong because my memory's pretty old now, is linked to the operating licence of Cranley Freight. I don't think that's linked to the airport, is it, or aerodrome? I think that was what that was put in place for when they moved that. I may be wrong, but as I say, any movement which is legally linked is linked to an operator. So I think we ought to take advice on that and check it out before we start confusing things. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any last questions before we move to the recommendation? Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one minor point of clarification. During the reading through the papers and in the introductory or the introduction we were provided with, The planning permissions that we've been talking about have bounced backwards before between WA 2015 0695 and 2016 0695. Am I right in thinking that's just a typo and we should only be referring to 2015? And if so, could the officers correct it in the final report? Because it appears in the conditions. We have a 2016 0695 in condition 4. Thank you.
Much rustling of papers down there.
Thank you, Chairman. We'll ensure that's amended and it should be 2015. Apologies.
Thank you. Can we move to the recommendation? Jolly good. So the recommendation is that subject to the Section 106 agreement to secure a contribution towards the delivery of a new footway between Alfold Village and the Compass Bridge access, conditions 1, 3 to 9 and 11 to 15, plus an additional condition 17 regarding the ratio of disabled parking spaces, plus informatives 1 to 7 as set out in the report, and the revised conditions 2, 10 and 16 as set out on the agenda update sheet. Permission be granted. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And those against? Abstentions?
2.
Thank you, members. The recommendation to grant is agreed. Moving on to item B2, WA 2016 1041, land at Eldon Bridge Farm, Elmbridge Road, Cranley, GU6 8JX. Joe, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is the erection of a detached dwelling and a garage. This is the location, so you've got the Elmbridge Road running through here, the A281 is this side, and you've got the Elmbridge Village over in this location. The application is proposed for a new dwelling with a new access drive, so if I go back there, you'll see the existing access comes around here. The proposed access is coming through to the centre of the site. New dwelling here and a garage block here. Members will recall that that a detached dwelling was considered and approved at committee last year under reference WA 2015 2379. That followed a previous appeal decision which, whilst we had recommended or we'd refused it on a number of grounds, the appeal inspector only dismissed it on one ground, and that was infrastructure contributions, or the lack of infrastructure contributions. Subsequent to that appeal, the previous permission that I said was granted last year was then reapplied. The application was re-put in with the offer of infrastructure contributions. But during the consideration of that application, the government changed the rules and we weren't then able to get infrastructure contributions. So we approved a building last year. This application is essentially very, very similar. The elevations are very similar. The positioning is very similar. What has happened is that the proposal has been handed. The floor plans have been handed. So what I've done, this is the elevations. They're the floor plans, but if we go to, and that's the proposed garage, but if we go to the next scheme, this is the one that you're currently considering now. You'll see the location of the garage is just slightly changed here, and it's this element, this is the utility at the ground floor, which has now been proposed on this side. So essentially it's exactly the same building, just in a slightly different format. So having regard to what was previously permitted last year, it's considered there's been no change in circumstances such that it would lead officers to have a different recommendation. There's the floor plan, just to clarify that. And therefore the application is recommended as set out in the agenda on pages 79 through to 84. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Joe. Right, open it up to members. Councillor Goodridge.
Chairman, when we looking at the plan that's in front of us, it seems that the roof is changed, unless I don't understand it properly. Any comments as to whether that's materially different? I suspect not. The other point, particularly on that elevation, is are we seriously saying that it's all going to be stripy, or is it the way it's just come out? Because I don't think I like a zebra-type building. Do I take it that it's same bricks throughout, not sort of white bricks and red bricks, or because it's all up the chimney and it's most peculiar? Probably the printer hasn't worked, I hope.
Yes, it's the way it's reproduced on our system, on our Communo system. It's in terms of the roof plan. I think this obviously has a flat element to it. It is sort of set between these gables, so you probably wouldn't see it. Well, you wouldn't see it. And in terms of floor plan, that isn't changing. That's the floor plan. So you can see that there is it's an H. Well, it's not quite an H shape, but it comes in at the rear. So there is there's no increase in floor space at first floor to what was previously permitted. Just obviously a design clarification.
Thank you, Joe. Anybody else? Oh, that's easy. Right, move to the recommendations. There are 2 recommendations. First, we move to recommendation A, that subject to the completion of a legal agreement to secure that planning permission reference WA 2013-0404 is not carried out with the permission hereby granted, and subject to conditions 1 to 12 and informatives 1 to 8 as set out in the report, permission be granted. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, unanimous.
Thank you, members. Recommendation A to grant is agreed. Now, recommendation B, that in the event that the agreement is not completed within 3 months of the date of the committee, then permission be refused for the reason 1 as set out in the report. May I have those in favour of recommendation B to refuse in the event that the agreement is not completed within 3 months of the date of committee? Good. Okay, thank you, members. Recommendation B to refuse in the event that the agreement is not completed within 3 months of the date of committee is agreed.
A change of face. I'm sorry it's not as good looking as Councillor Ailes, but that's what you've got. So we come to WA 2016-10, 1082, erection of extensions and alterations, a revision of WA 2015-2071 at Hatch Cottage, Markwick Lane, Loxhill, GU8 4BE. And just a quick comment on that, every application we have had this evening is our revisions of previous applications. No, nothing new as such. Officers, would you like to give your presentation?
Thank you, Chairman. The application site outlined in red here is located to the north of Markwick Lane and west of Godalming Road. The site comprises a 2-storey semi-detached dwelling with an attached garage. To the west of the dwelling and within the application site are some stable buildings and a sand school, which have previously been granted permission for equestrian use ancillary to the dwelling Hatch Cottage. The neighbouring semi-detached dwelling is located to the east of Hatch Cottage, and there are further residential dwellings to the east and west of the site. These photographs show the rear and front elevations of the buildings. Works have been commenced on the rear elevation to implement the previous permission given earlier this year, which I'll discuss later in the presentation. So this is the block plan. The application seeks permission for alterations to the roof form to create a cat-side roof on the rear elevation, the insertion of roof lights, alterations to the fenestration and the existing second floor window, construction of a dormer window on the first floor of the rear elevation, erection of an extension to the existing single-storey side extension to infill the existing porch area, and the formation of a crown-pitched roof and balcony on the existing single-storey side extension. So the block plan here demonstrates the positioning of the works, which are at the rear here, at the front and on this side, in relation to the neighbouring property, New Cottage. These are the existing floor plans, and these are the proposed floor plans. So this is the proposed infill for the porch, the balcony. This is the dormer window at first floor level, and then it'll have a shower room put into the loft plan, the loft area. These are the existing elevations. And these are the proposed elevations against that of the permission granted earlier this year. So the differences between the two schemes are roof lights in the rear elevation here, the front very small extension with the glazing, full kind of door glazing there, and also the materials for the dormer windows would be weatherboarding, which would match that in this kind of front dormer there. So that's the differences between this application and the previous one. So the determining issues, the matters of principal and technical opinion are the principle of development. The site is located within the green belt outside any defined settlement area where there is a general presumption against inappropriate development, which is by definition harmful. However, the principle of a residential extension can be acceptable. The matters of planning judgment which councillors are asked to consider this evening are the impact on the green belt. The MPPF states the extension to a dwelling could be appropriate, provided it is not disproportionate to the original dwelling. Our policy RD2 states that an extension greater than 40% of the original size of the dwelling would be considered disproportionate. Officers have calculated that the cumulative increase in floor space for this dwelling would be 24%, and therefore numerically it would not be considered disproportionate. Additionally, the height, bulk and form should be assessed when determining whether an extension is disproportionate, and officers consider the proposal would be acceptable in these terms, and therefore it would be appropriate within the green belt. Other matters to consider this evening are design and impact on visual amenity, including the AOMB and AGLV, and the impact on residential amenity, for which officers have no concern. As such, the recommendation is that permission be granted as set out on pages 101 to 102 of the agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments from the committee? Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm only going to speak because it's within our ward, and as ward member, I feel I ought to say something. It's not significantly different to what we agreed was acceptable last time this came in front of us. There are no objections from the Hascombe Parish Council. As such, I'm totally supportive of the revision and the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any other further comments? No. So now can we go to the recommendation on page 101, that permission be granted subject to the conditions as listed there and the informatives. Can I have a show of hands of those who agree?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Permission is granted, and that concludes the meeting.